Tonight, the map of this conflict is being redrawn, not by advancing infantry, but by the systematic, merciless destruction of the veins that feed the Russian war machine. This is a story about logistics and how, in the span of 48 hours, Ukraine has transformed the once secure bastion of Crimea from a critical staging area into a deadly, bleeding logistical liability. This is the new reality of the deep strike, the strategic campaign designed not to win ground, but to starve the enemy of the very ability to fight on the ground they currently occupy. Something extraordinary and truly dangerous has just unfolded across the Crimean Peninsula. Ukrainian forces, utilizing their expanding arsenal of long-range precision assets, have targeted and successfully struck the very spine of Russia's southern command structure. We are not talking about isolated acts of harassment. This is a coordinated surgical operation aimed at creating systemic paralysis. The focus is razor-sharp. Sever the railroad, drain the fuel, eliminate the ammunition, and blind the commands. The objective is to make Russia's southern front, the entire defense line holding Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, unsustainable. It is succeeding. This isn't posturing. This isn't routine. This is the deepest and most impactful strategic disruption of Russia's supply chain since the war began, and it all revolves around one concept: turning the flow of supplies into a trickle of corpses. And the linchpin of this entire strategic campaign, the first domino that fell, was the critical rail hub of Dzhankoy. We have verifiable data now, satellite intelligence and Russian reporting, that reluctantly confirm the success of the operation. Ukrainian long-range precision munitions struck the key railway sorting yard, an approximate fuel storage facility near Dzhankoy, at approximately 2:30 local time. We must understand the geometry of this location. Dzhankoy is not merely a town. It is the absolute funnel, the single pressurized point through which almost every liter of fuel, every artillery shell, and every rotation of armor must flow before it can reach the fighting units on the front lines. Take Dzhankoy out, and you don't just interrupt the supply line. You tie a knot in the supply artery. The precision of this strike is what sets it apart. It wasn't a carpet bombing. It was surgical. Intelligence confirms a successful secondary explosion, the telltale sign of munitions hitting a volatile target, and the immediate destruction of at least 5 high-capacity diesel tanks. 5 tanks may sound like an engineering report, but translate that into military mobility. Those tanks represented hundreds of thousands of gallons of high-octane diesel fuel, the lifeblood of the T-72 and T-90 tank battalions, the essential sustenance for the armored personnel carriers, and the generators powering the command posts. When those 5 tanks vaporized in the Crimean night, a shockwave traveled up the logistical chain far greater than the actual blast radius. Every commander in the field, every driver waiting for refueling, instantly understood the new vulnerability. The fuel that was supposed to arrive tomorrow is now ash. The operational tempo that was calculated based on that fuel being available is now obsolete. This forces instant, desperate conservation measures, reducing patrols, grounding non-essential vehicles, and inevitably, slowing the entire pace of Russian defensive operations. The military doctrine of mass and maneuver depends absolutely on mass availability of fuel. Ukraine has just proven they can selectively turn off the spigot. But the most devastating effect wasn't the fuel itself, though that was critical. It was the calculated paralysis of the railway system. The operational genius of the Dzhankoy strike was hitting the infrastructure necessary to move the cargo, thus compounding the fuel loss with immediate, inescapable gridlock. The consequences of this singular strike are now being quantified in hours of delay. Hours that translate directly into lives saved on the Ukrainian side and opportunities lost on the Russian side. The Russian Ministry of Transport, in a rare moment of quantifiable operational admission, confirmed that critical rail traffic south of Dzhankoy was successfully halted for a minimum of 38 hours. Let us pause on that number. 38 hours. This is not a traffic jam in Moscow. This is the main artery of a global military operation being blocked by debris and critical structural damage. 38 hours is an eternity in high-intensity combat. Think about what a 38-hour delay means for the frontline units holding defensive positions near Robotyne or Volodar. It means the rotating unit, the fresh battalion moving south to relieve the exhausted, demoralized troops, is now sitting static hundreds of miles away. It means the critical shipment of 152mm artillery shells, designated for a planned counter-battery fire mission, is stuck, immobile, vulnerable to further targeting, or simply too late to matter. A unit defending itself against a concerted push relies on the clockwork precision of resupply. When that clockwork stops for 38 hours, the units start rationing their resources. They fire fewer shells. They conserve fuel. They lose their ability to counterattack. They wait. And waiting under heavy fire is how morale breaks and lines crumble. This delay of 38 hours fundamentally alters the operational picture for the Southern Front. For every hour the rail line is closed, Russia loses the capacity to move hundreds of tons of critical material. This is a logistical deficit that cannot be easily fixed. When the line eventually reopens, the backlog creates a colossal, slow-moving vulnerability. Trains are forced to idle, waiting for clearance, becoming perfect stationary targets for subsequent deep strike operations. Ukraine has leveraged one strike to create a future vulnerability cascade. They have engineered a crisis point where the Russians are forced to choose between massive congestion and complete starvation. The 38-hour disruption is the clearest, coldest evidence that Ukraine's deep strike strategy is achieving systemic failure in Russia's ability to maintain its forces. The campaign did not stop at the rail yards. The Ukrainian approach is total interdiction, targeting air, land, and sea components that support the southern axis. A complex drone swarm operation targeted the military airfield adjacent to Saki. Saki Air Base is not some marginal staging ground. It is one of the most historically significant and heavily utilized naval aviation hubs in the Black Sea theater. It is the power projection hub for the Russian fleet's air assets. And Ukraine went straight for the heart of its operational capacity, the munitions. The drone swarm, a testament to evolving asymmetrical warfare, resulted in heavy damage to a primary ammunition storage bunker. Ukrainian sources were swift to claim the strike targeted an active depot containing munitions designated specifically for use on the Kherson axis. This detail is crucial. It means Kiev has achieved not just deep penetration, but highly accurate intelligence regarding the flow and destination of Russian ordnance. They know exactly which bullets and bombs are destined for their troops, and they are destroying them before they leave the peninsula. The Saki strike means that the Russian air power intended to suppress Ukrainian positions near the Dnipro River or provide close air support is now facing a dual crisis: a lack of fuel due to the Dzhankoy strike and a lack of munitions due to the Saki strike. The two operations are strategically synergistic, reinforcing the effect of paralysis across the entire southern operation. If an aircraft cannot fuel and cannot arm, it cannot fly. And if it cannot fly, the troops on the ground lose their most critical overwatch and offensive support mechanism. This is the systematic defanging of Russian air superiority in the region. And the severity of this systematic dismantling of the supply line has drawn immediate, stark analysis from the highest levels of Western military command. This is not partisan speculation. This is cold, professional military doctrine assessment. General Philip Breedlove, retired, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, a voice of unquestionable strategic authority, noted on Monday that this is far more than a simple sequence of punitive strikes. He stated unflinchingly, "These aren't just punitive strikes. This is the systematic denerving of the logistics tail. Kiev is now treating Crimea as a kill zone for Russian resupply, forcing them to rely on less efficient maritime alternatives." The terminology is chillingly precise: a kill zone. It signifies a deliberate change in strategic posture. Crimea is no longer viewed as an untouchable, protected rear area. It is now viewed by Kiev as an extension of the battlefield, a massive, static target-rich environment ripe for continuous, demoralizing attrition. The systematic denerving refers to the psychological and mechanical disruption. When a supply line is targeted with this level of regularity and precision, when the enemy can reliably hit fuel at Dzhankoy one night, ammunition at Saki the next, and rail switches the night after, the logistics personnel begin to anticipate the strikes. They slow down. They hesitate. They choose less efficient, more circuitous routes. The entire logistics process becomes fraught with danger and massive delays, compounding the measured 38-hour gridlock into a continuous, unpredictable state of operational friction. And General Breedlove's final point regarding the maritime alternatives is the pivot to the next phase of Ukraine's strategy. When the land bridge, The essential railway that connects Russia proper through Crimea to the southern front is rendered non-functional or too dangerous to use. Russia is forced to pivot to sea transport. But Ukraine anticipated this. They planned for this contingency. They understand that starving the land route only shifts the target to the sea route. This brings us to the coast, to the ancient naval heart of the Black Sea Fleet, Sevastopol. Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels, the deadly maritime drones that have proven so terrifyingly effective against Russian warships, targeted the entrance channel of the Sevastopol naval base. This was not an attempt to sink a cruiser. This was an act of interdiction designed to choke the throat of maritime logistics, an expansion of the kill zone thesis to the water. The operation reportedly resulted in the sinking of a refurbished civilian tug that had been repurposed for military logistics. Again, look past the initial headline. The sinking of a tug is not the same as sinking a warship, but its strategic impact is enormous. Repurposed civilian vessels are now the essential workhorses of the desperate Russian supply chain, ferrying fuel, food, and low-priority cargo when the trains are too dangerous to run. Sinking this tug removes vital throughput capacity, forcing Russia to divert scarce military assets or risk using larger, more valuable logistics vessels. More importantly, the incident forced the temporary cessation of all major naval traffic through the bay entrance. The moment the USV struck, the entire naval environment froze. Russia had to activate countermine and counter-drone measures, diverting attention, resources, and time away from operational tasks. This achieved a physical blockade of Sevastopol, even if temporary. It is a stunning display of asymmetrical control over a globally significant naval facility, demonstrating that even the most hardened ports are now vulnerable to cheap, mass-produced robotic threats. The simultaneous execution of these strikes, rail, air munitions, and sea access, signals a level of strategic planning and intelligence integration that military analysts are calling a paradigm shift. This is not guerrilla warfare. This is complex, theater-level operational art executed by a military operating with deep, targeted reach. How has Moscow responded to this unprecedented assault on its critical supply infrastructure? The response is not bravado or denial, but frantic, physical fortification, the most honest indicator of operational panic. Russian Governor Sergei Aksionov, tasked with overseeing the security of the peninsula, reported that while damage was predictably downplayed as minimal, military engineers have commenced the urgent installation of prefabricated concrete blast barriers and earthworks around high-value aviation fuel dumps and command posts across the peninsula. This installation of massive, prefabricated concrete blast barriers is the physical manifestation of Russia's fear. It is a tacit admission that Ukrainian precision is undeniable and repeatable. You do not deploy hundreds of tons of concrete and earth-moving equipment if the damage was minimal. You deploy it when you realize your entire logistics structure, previously assumed to be safe behind the front lines, is now acutely vulnerable to direct, deep attack. They are building defensive structures around the very assets, fuel dumps, maintenance facilities, command nodes, that Ukraine just proved it can destroy at will. This defensive posture reveals a fundamental change in Russian operational planning. They are transitioning from offensive maintenance to defensive hardening. They are spending vast resources on static defenses far behind the lines, resources that should be funding ammunition production or frontline troop reinforcement. This redirection of effort is a direct win for Ukraine, forcing Russia to waste time, money, and material building walls where there should be flowing supplies. The entire picture that emerges from the last 48 hours is one of strategic pressure applied at the point of maximum systemic weakness. Logistics. Ukraine is not winning through massive counteroffensives right now. They are winning through patience, precision, and the systematic dismantling of the enemy's operational capacity to sustain itself. When the rail line is closed for 38 hours, the military is weakened. When the Saki munitions depot burns, the Air Force is crippled. When the repurposed tug sinks in Sevastopol, the maritime option becomes dangerous. And when Moscow is forced to start pouring concrete around its fuel dumps, it is a stark, undeniable confirmation that they have lost the initiative and the logistical security of their most prized operational hub, Crimea. The strategic consequence is that the southern front, that massive, heavily fortified Russian line stretching hundreds of miles, is now being slowly strangled. Without reliable, continuous resupply, without fresh units arriving on time, and without the fuel necessary to maneuver their armored assets. Russian forces are increasingly becoming static defenders, relying solely on deeply entrenched positions. This makes them predictable. And in modern warfare, predictable static forces are targets awaiting concentration of fire. The question now is not if Russia can hold the line, but for how long can they hold the line while their lifeblood is bleeding out behind them. Kiev has declared Crimea a logistical kill zone, and the precision strikes of the last 2 days have validated that claim with devastating, quantifiable proof. The clock is now ticking on Russia's capacity to sustain its war, measured not in months or years, but in the hours of delay created by a severed rail line, and the gallons of fuel reduced to ash by a perfect deep strike. This is the moment when maps cease to matter, and pure logistics decide the fate of nations. And right now, the Russian supply line is hemorrhaging critically. The south is bleeding, and the pressure is only intensifying.